This model has been languishing on my painting desk since Adepticon 2022. It's time to paint it up. It is the Space Marine Captain in Gravis armor, and I need a Captain model to lead my Black Templar crusade, because currently I don't have one. Or at least I don't have one I want to use. This is my old Space Marine Captain. I call him Clairvox. I kit bashed this guy about 6 years ago, and he has been a good and noble commander to my Black Templar crusade. But the look of Space Marines has changed a lot over the last 6 years, and the way I paint Space Marines has changed a lot over the last 6 years. So I want to paint this guy up to match and to be a proper flagship of my army. Now your HQs should be a cut above the standard rank and file. There's only one of them, so they're a good opportunity to really pour your energy into one model and make them look special. An easy way to do this would be to change up your painting style. My Black Templar are painted with contrast paint, so if I did nothing but layering and glazing, it would lead to a better looking model. However, changing up the painting style could lead to the models not really gelling together very well. Take this Tabitha from Fallout Wasteland Warfare next to one of my Black Templars. They look a little weird. I think the way to make your HQs really stand out is you paint them exactly like one of your normal troopers, and then you add to it. This is good for 2 reasons. Number 1, you don't have to develop any new skills, you just do all the painting you know how to do, and then you add on top. And number 2, you don't have to plan ahead. I need to get this guy all painted up, see what he looks like, and then make decisions. Maybe a little something extra on the sword, maybe fancy up that cape a little bit. This guy's been sitting unpainted on my desk for months and months. It's time to get to work. I prepped the model with a black primer and a zenithal, and although I don't like to do it, I did some sub-assemblies. The head and shoulders I have left off for now. I prefer models altogether, but this dude has so many little tubes, chains, and dangly bits, it's just gonna make things a lot easier. My Black Power Armor recipe uses lots of contrast paint. Leviathan Blue, Black Templar, and Contrast Medium. The Black Templar is an obvious choice, it's in the name, but the Leviathan Blue tints the blackness into dark blueness, and that color makes things a little darker than just shades of gray. I've experimented using Army Painter speed paint for this, and they do work better, but I don't have the ratios nailed down quite yet, so for this guy, I'm going with the tried and true, applying a big wet coat to all the black armor. Now the armor is nice and tinted, I base coated the cape. I've never painted a cape I truly love, it always takes mountains of work, or it just looks like I slapped on some speed paint. Usually because I just slapped on some speed paint. Black and red are the main colors on this captain, now for the gold. I put earth brown, yellow, and white onto my wet palette. Then I wet blended these onto the mini, with brown on the bottom, yellow in the middle, and white on top, just like candy corn. I do this fast so I can wet blend them together while the paint is still wet. Then a brown wash. I usually thin this a little, but I decided to apply it straight from the pot. I should have thinned it a little. It's fine, but ended up being a little overpowering. Now the thing that makes this effect look like metal, and not just dirty candy corn, is a dry brushing of light desaturated gold on top. This is a super light dusting to deposit the metallic flakes on the edges and tips of each gold detail. This might seem like a really fussy way to do metallics, but it's my favorite way on my contrast paint Black Templar. It does a really good job of making sure that everything is really cohesive and feels like it's in the same style. It's basically just a simple non-metallic metal with a dusting of true metallics on top, for the glitter factor. All the big steps are done, it's time to pick out all the leftover bits and bobs, like the belt on his chest, you know, where belts go. Now for the capes. Peasant capes are one simple piece of fabric, but royal capes have a lining, so I want a different color for the inside of this cape, and I chose cream. And I can't just leave the outside of the cape as one raggedy, patchy base coat. I took a bright red and did some highlights, thinning down the paint and going over the folds again and again until I achieved full saturation, and throwing a dark red in the recesses. Now I put down my paintbrushes for a little bit because Games Workshop has already painted some Templar symbols for me in the form of decals. I applied a nice gold and white Templar symbol to the shoulder pad. I want to glue it down now. It's a bit of a faux pas to glue sub-assemblies on before the miniature is complete, but I need it there for later when I'm thinking about lighting. After that decal detour, I painted the servo skull with a green-gray. Green because I don't have any other green on the miniature, and I want the skull and his little tails to be obviously different than the captain's black armor. Then I dry brushed some dark tan over the base and followed it up with some light gray dry brushing. And just like that, the miniature is done. It looks just as good as any other Black Templar in my army. I could throw a decal on that banner, paint the base rim black, and call it a day. But the day is young, and I want to take this miniature to the next level. That's going to mean lots of free-handing, perfecting this face, and taking light into consideration. To get a sense of lighting, I took a flashlight and shined it over the model. This lets me see where the brightest spots should be, and I moved the flashlight around until I found spots that I thought looked good. I made up some more Black Templar medium and glazed this over the armor and all the spots the flashlight didn't reach. I did this over and over, laying down a dark spot and then taking a clean damp paintbrush and smoothing the transition. I did this individually to every single piece of armor, leaving the light blue-gray showing through in only small spots. Now my shadows are taken care of, it's time for the highlights. I mixed some light blue-gray with the speed paint and contrast paint and applied this sparingly everywhere that I didn't just shade. This is the light reflecting off the raised portions of the armor. And on top of all that, some white paint. Just a little bit. Edge highlights and spots of specular highlights on any round surfaces. And that is black armor take 2. I try to make it shiny black armor because usually shiny highlights are a lot smaller and a lot brighter, and so that leaves most of each panel black, and so it has an overall darker appearance. But now I need to correct all of the gold pieces, because right now they kind of look like stickers because their shadows don't match the shadows on the armor. To do this, I use some speed paint brown. This is a transparent color, and I can put this over the gold, and some of that original shading and highlighting will show through, just darker and browner. All the shadows I just applied to the armor will show me exactly where this brown paint should go. I took the flashlight back out to find out how the light would fall on the red cape draped over his shoulder, and I'm pleased to report my armor is looking like I got all the highlights in the right spots. Red is a tricky color to highlight because it becomes pink when you add white to it, but there's an easy fix for that. I applied spotty, squiggly highlights to the top of the cape, thinning it down when it got closer to the belt buckle and backpack. And then I did the same thing with white paint. A red watery glaze over that brings the colors back to vibrant red. It's still a little pink, but it does a good job of hiding the highlights and keeping the overall color red. My light is finished, and now some shadows. I glazed black opposite the highlights, and now the cape is looking much more realistic. I did the exact same steps on the cape, using the flashlight to give me an idea of where the highlights should go. The scraggly highlights will give me a texture, and that'll make the cape stand out as a different, softer material than the smoother armor. Properly lighting a scene is definitely a skill I need to continue working on. The flashlight helped a lot, and when I get to the base, I'll probably use that as a way to reinforce some of my, let's call them decisions. Now it's time for lots and lots of freehanding. On the bottom of this cape, I want to paint a small, thin gold line. I find that's the easiest way to make capes look really, really good. I painted a bunch of brown dots about 1/4 inch away from the edge of the cape. This dotted line will be my target for this stripe. I've YOLO'd lines in the past and ended up with wonky trim, so it's an important step. Now I can just connect the dots and I'm left with a nice even line. Now to highlights. All I have to do is follow the highlights I already did on the cape. Anywhere red got some tan, and anywhere pink got some yellow paint. Now this is not a yellow trim line, but a gold line, and to make it gold, I glazed some metallic gold paint over top of these browns and yellows, exactly like the original metallics. The old line on the cape trick is one of my all-time favorites, and it's really not that tricky. Just paint on a line and you make the highlights match the highlights you already did on the cape. And it really makes it look like you know what you're doing. And you know what else I really like to do? Hazard stripes. I decided the protuberance on the gun would get this effect. I base coated the black, and this will help me out later. Then I painted on light gray stripes. Light gray because this is the color I have that has the best coverage. I can paint lines in 2 coats, and then I can clean them up with black paint. It's easier to cover up light colors. Now I could get the colors I want. I glazed yellow over the light gray, and for the secret sauce, orange ink. This is an incredibly bright saturated color, and using this as my shadows lets me have lots of contrast without losing vibrancy. The napkin ring shaped thing on his gun is now really eye-catching. It's always a good idea to paint weapons and heads different colors so that they really draw the eye. And speaking of weapons, that chainsword is calling. Painting checkers is a bummer. It's super easy to make any mistakes and super easy to spot those mistakes because it's basically a grid. I find tapping spots of paint into sections and then dragging those spots into squares is the easiest way to do this. And I did a good enough job to keep the black shading I did underneath. I used this as a guide to apply my highlights, painting over top of the squares until they were nice and saturated. Freehanding checkers is not as easy as freehanding a line. It's probably the next step up in terms of difficulty. Now it's time to tackle that banner, but first, did you know make a new terrain set every single month? This month we have the Orc Brewery, the unofficial sequel to Octerus, with new orky walls and a goth rocker stage. You can pick up the whole set through the EOB terrain tier on our Patreon, hosted through Comics, Games, and Things, or you can subscribe to our tribes on My Mini Factory. I love banners, specifically back banners. They are absurd. I want a half light, half dark banner, and just like the hazard stripes, I base coated the light half with light gray. I highlighted this with a light gray and then white paint, and then it was time for the color. I want a yellow and I want the layers I just did to show through, so I watered this down and used a little bit of brown to reinforce the shadows. On the other half of the banner, I went with a black like the Black Templars, and highlighted a little with gray. I find dark colors much easier to work with than light colors, and the trim around the design I went with a white. Now I want to load this up with decals, and the surface is not perfectly smooth, so to give them the best chance of sticking nicely, I gave it 2 coats of gloss paint. This will fill in all the surface imperfections. I cut a Black Templar symbol in half and put this over the yellow and a white Templar symbol over the black, lining them up perfectly to form a grim dark yin-yang. And having a little more room on the bottom, I applied some more tiny symbols. Once they were dry, I did 2 more coats of gloss medium to hide the edge of the plastic transfer sheet, and then a coat of matte medium to dull it all back down. Decals are pretty great. Conservatively, I've applied probably about 1 billion transfers to my Black Templar Space Marines, and thank goodness Black Templar still have decal sheets. So many Space Marine chapters don't get these. Games Workshop, more than Ultramarines deserve transfer sheets. Put them in the boxes. The banner's done, the weapons are done, now the only thing is the face. And it's only half a face, so it should only be half as hard. I want the brightest face possible to stand out against the black armor, so I don't want to darken it too much. Step 1, magenta. It's not the most accurate thing, but I find magenta makes such a lovely skin. It makes the character feel alive. After that, I glaze some tan over the dome of his head and eyebrows, and to finish it off, I glaze some yellow onto his temples. All these weird vibrant colors right on his silly face will make it feel different than all the cloth and metal on his armor. I probably should have gone with the helmeted head because the teeny tiny little head doesn't really fill up that space very well. The Gravis armor has a chest out to here and it looks a little bit ridiculous, but I'm okay with a little bit ridiculous. I feel like the naked head tells a better story. Now, to make the lighting look a little bit more plausible by fixing up that base. Right now it's all even, and I want to add some directional light and shadow. First, a dry brushing of white near his front foot. Then, some airbrushing of white paint to brighten this area that is directly being hit by the sun. To darken the area under his body and cape, I sprayed some burnt umber ink. This is a transparent color that'll let some of the previous layers show through. Then, a dry brushing of light tan to highlight all the lovely sand and rock textures. And now, there are only 2 things left to do. Painting the rim of the base black, of course, and then giving this captain a name. Subscribers to our Patreon at the Mega Fans tier get immortalized as members of my crusade. Introducing Fox, the captain in Gravis armor. This is by far the best painted Black Templar in my collection. It was done at about 5 hours, but I'm glad I poured another 15 into him. It might seem kind of crazy to paint it all, and then pretty much paint over every single thing, but I think that step 1 is a good step, because if I just started from scratch, from a black prime, and then tried to do this, I don't think it would have ended up exactly like this. It takes that learning and exploration and kind of understanding the model, trying things out with the flashlight, covering up some highlights that ended up in the wrong spots. It takes a lot of just diligent work to get a model from 0 to hero, because this is a Space Marine hero, it's a Space Marine captain. Technically, it's a Space Marine marshal, because the Black Templar don't have captains, they have marshals. And I would say he is a little bit better than my own marshal. Leave a comment below which marshal you prefer. Although if you say the old one, I'm gonna cry.